Good morning. This is Omar Muhammad, and this is our 36 minutes on anti-Semitism. Today, we are honored to welcome Oren Segal. Oren, welcome.
Thank you so much, Omar, for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure, if you insist. I'm the vice president of the ADL Center on Extremism. The center combats, exposes, and tries to mitigate in various different ways, not only anti-Semitism, but other forms of hate. We look at anti-Semitism and hate coming from extremist movements, from the broader public discussion, online and off. And, at the end of the day, I have an honor of working with people, not only in the center, but throughout ADL, who are committed to fighting bad people who want to do bad things to others, to explaining and educating the public about anti-Semitism and all forms of hate. And at the end of the day, trying to push back against what so many of us in all communities are dealing with right now.
So, Oren, there is a lot going on now. And many people are getting involved in anti-Semitism, whether on campus, on social media, on public media, you name it. Which brings me to the question that I usually ask as the first question, which is, what is the definition of anti-Semitism?
Yeah. And of course, I'm sure you've gotten different answers from every different guest because, there are the short answers, there's the long answers. I mean, there's been books written about the definition and there's been, tweets. I mean, for me, at the core, anti-Semitism is a belief or behavior hostile towards Jews because they are Jewish. It's that simple. Now, of course, that takes various forms. It could be religious teachings that proclaim the inferiority of Jews. It can be conspiracy theories about so-called Jewish characteristics. It can be political efforts to isolate, oppress, or injure the community. But, what we do know is no matter how it's sort of defined, anti-Semitism tends to surge during times of turmoil, whether it's political or economic, whether there's rapid social change. It's a tool. It's a tool of political manipulation to get people to find a common enemy. And we've seen this throughout history. So in every generation, anti-Semitic stereotypes and myths and conspiracies are recycled. But honestly, Omar, at the end of the day, what is it based on? Fear. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. That leads to suffering. Now, I can't believe it. I think I just quoted Yoda from Star Wars. But, there you have it.
So, Oren, we are in a very difficult time now. And social media has become a fundamental element of the daily life. So my question is, what is going on in terms of anti-Semitism online on different social media networks? What's happening there?
So, at the time of this recording, 2024, when you look at anti-Semitism online, I mean, it is robust. Anybody with an internet connection has access to not only anti-Semitic ideas, but anti-Semitic experiences of the types that have never existed in human history, right? I mean, the ability to access it, to share it, for it to animate activity. I mean, we've never seen anything like this. And frankly, this was also true in 2014. But what we're seeing today, to answer your question specifically, is really dependent upon where online we're talking about. I've come to realize that people have vastly different experiences online. So my 80-year-old mother has a very different online experience than my young child. And yet, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or comment section of a newspaper website, which may track a little older, or whether it is TikTok and gaming applications and Twitch and Steam and so on and so forth, for a younger audience, the one thing they all have in common is that anti-Semites are using all these platforms to try to spread their anti-Semitism and to try to convince people of their worldview. So the current state of anti-Semitism on social networks is not good.
How has the October 7 attack changed the situation online? I know in your organization you have been following the rise of anti-Semitism since October 7, but what are the trends, Oren? What should we understand more?
So I think the sort of post-October 7th trends in anti-Semitism that we're seeing online are similar in some ways to what we're seeing offline, right? So you take this sort of moment, probably the deadliest, most sort of profound attack against the Jewish people in generations, in Israel by Hamas. And then, within, I wouldn't even say days, Omar, I'd say within moments, you see the celebration of such acts, the glorification of it, the justification of it. Now, this is true, in meme culture online, where people are putting out content celebrating it, or, circulating the footage from the terrorists themselves of capturing and torturing, innocent people and using that as currency with other bad actors online. All right, that's a form of anti-Semitism by sharing that sort of suffering. But in the real world too, right? In protests around the world, right? We're seeing that same level of excitement and celebration around this murder. And I want to be very clear about something, because I think it's just always good to say, but it also has the benefit of being true, is I'm not talking about criticism of Israel, right? Criticism of Israel is not inherently anti-Semitic. Protesting against Israel is not inherently anti-Semitic. I know this, because I spend a lot of time in Israel where I see protests and criticism of Israeli policies and military action, etc. But when we see people, and this is what happened after October 7th on a very high level, protesting Israeli military or Israeli political decisions in front of synagogues, like that is anti-Semitism. When you are blaming an entire religious community and you don't even know what their politics are, by the mere fact that they're Jewish, right? For what is happening in different parts of the world, or, across the world. I mean, the speed in which that happened, I think, is going to be a lasting impression of October 7th. And one more thing I want to say about this. The other thing, both online and on the ground, was the immediate denial of Jewish suffering. And to me, nothing was more blatant than seeing people rip down missing or kidnapped posters of children in the United States and around the world. The denial of that sort of reality and suffering. Like, I exist in dark spaces. I've been doing this work for 25 years. Like, I've seen everything. I was not prepared to see people just deny a massacre that just occurred, that was represented in sort of pulling down those flyers. So, I think anti-Semitism has so many different manifestations, and post October 7th, I think we've been reminded about how sometimes concerns over Israeli policy are exploited and manipulated to promote some of the anti-Semitism that I think the Jewish community is at this point very used to.
So there is an assumption, but before I go into this, I want to confirm what you said when I was speaking to the German Federal Commissioner on Combating Antisemitism. He stated, according to their official numbers, that 15% of the Germans are open or either are involved in the different types of anti-Semitism, including what you mentioned is that the tropes of saying, I don't believe that, how is it possible that the Jews do not do anything about what Israel is doing? Which means that all Jews across the world, including in Israel, are responsible for what the government is doing. And this is anti-Semitic. And the problem also, Oren, with the protest, as you say, the protest is protected by the freedom of speech. But then within the protest happens different anti-Semitic expressions. The question here, because some people assume that what is online remains online, and that's not true. How has this impacted the Jewish communities? This type of rise of anti-Semitism online, this prejudice, this hatred. And also, I was speaking with a friend of mine who is an American Jewish rabbi, and he said we might need to use the word pogrom instead of saying October 7th. We should call it October pogrom. I don't know if you agree or disagree with this, but how has this impacted Jewish life offline?
Yeah, I mean, the impact of October 7th and the narratives online have had a tremendous impact of Jewish life. But, I would say Jewish life online, because so many of our lives are online, but also just sort of Jewish life, offline. But this is like, this has been true for a long time, right? So when we are monitoring, for example, white supremacists, right, talking about how the Jews are puppet masters, manipulating immigration policy, right, in order to make America more brown and, help move forward the demise of the white race in America, right? This conspiracy of white supremacists. We know that the online spaces where people are sharing that mean that somebody will get influenced and angry, and then we have a shooting in Pittsburgh. Somebody motivated by that idea, right? We have seen shooter after shooter, and these are the most deadly consequences, right? Mass shooters who are motivated by anti-Semitic conspiracy theories to carry out action, whether it's against the Jewish community or others that they oppose. So like the debate over whether what happens online influences on the ground, that debate is over. For years we have known that people's realities, include what they're learning and seeing online, and know that impacts what they do in the real world. So post October 7th, let's think about what we've seen around the country. We've documented between October 7th and the end of 2023, an over 300% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in comparison to the previous year. We just released our audit of anti-Semitic incidents. These are vandalism, harassment, and assault that is reported to ADL every year. We've been doing this for over 40 years. We had over 8,000 incidents reported to us last year. And a big reason for that spike, an all-time high, nearly, 900% higher than 10 years ago. A big part of this is because of the post-October 7th incidents that we were tracking, right? Now, look at what we're seeing now in 2024 with encampments on college campuses. Now, I don't think every student who's protesting is an anti-Semite. They are not. I actually don't think a lot of the people there are all students either, right? There's people coming from other places. But what has been so concerning to the Jewish community about these activities because protests are protected. People want to go to college campuses and do their protests. I mean, I have no issue with that as a tactic, right, in general. But when they are saying Zionists are not allowed to go to class, when they are saying almost checking, like it's almost like checking papers, and, you know, that is reminiscent of like ancient and like age-old anti-Semitism, supporting the types of terrorist organizations, in many cases through their placards, their symbols, their flags that are geared toward murdering Jews, or in some cases telling people to go back to Poland. It may be a fringe of these movements, but these things are not just sort of spontaneous. They are learned. And there are organizations and there are movements and there are people that have been promoting these types of ideas, certainly in online spaces, for many, many years. And so to me, again, the anti-Semitic strain of some of the protest movement, I'm not calling the protest movement anti-Semitic, but the minority that is really pushing the boundaries and expressing anti-Semitism, to me, I've seen these ideas and these narratives before. I see them every single day. My team does online. And so my point is, yes, the online anti-Semitism has animated real world activity that I think people, your audience, is hearing about and reading about every single day.
I think to add to that as well is when someone is talking about anti-Semitism, the first thing you get is like, oh, you are using anti-Semitism to silence me. And this is how it was being used to justify the anti-Semitism that is spreading across the online and mainstream media. So we talked about post-October 7. We talked about social media, and I have discussed this also at length with other speakers. But let's focus, Oren, on the solutions. I mean, what should be done to combat anti-Semitism online? Who is responsible for such fight?
Yeah. So, you know, at the end of the day, right, there's a responsibility that people have in terms of what they decide to use in terms of platforms where they spend their time. There's so like users of technology have a responsibility. The platforms themselves have a major responsibility in terms of what they will and will not allow on their platforms, right? And ADL has been involved, you know, in these conversations for years, right? The tech companies themselves should be proactively, you know, investing in making sure that their platforms are not exploited by anti-Semites, that they are trying to identify and remove anti-Semitism and other forms of hate, by the way, right? And the challenge is that some companies actually say they want to do that, but maybe may not be doing a great job. Omar, the problem is there's many platforms that don't give a crap. That they are excited, like they want to be the platform where you can say anything. And if anti-Semitism and, you know, racism and Islamophobia and misogyny and all forms of hate become kind of a normalized part of the discussion on those platforms, they welcome that. And, you know, in America, you can kind of be as hateful as you want to be, right? There's nothing illegal about hating. And so the question is like, while we want companies to put people over profits, or we want companies to have some sort of social conscience and not like be able to promote the types of ideas that we know are damaging. You know, the options end up being either we trust them to do that, or we have to rely on outside forces to mandate it. Right. And that's where sort of the discussion about what is the role of government in terms of providing more of a, it's not even a reason, but to start pushing companies to be more responsible for that hatred. I mean, it's a tough question because, like, Omar, if you can be as hateful as you want to be in your day-to-day life, right? And there's nothing illegal about that. Like, how do you convince a company that it is not only the right thing to do, but sort of they have to do that? I think that's the challenge that government is having right now.
But Oren, sometimes the tech organizations and companies, they say we are trying to do something, but as you said and rightly stated and noted, I mean, they are not doing enough. I will give you an example. I wanted myself to test the algorithm of YouTube. They have introduced a new type of streaming, which is called Shorts. And I found a video of a Yemeni guy dressing like a religious Jewish person, surrounded by a few people claiming to be the Arab leaders, and putting all of these historic anti-Semitic tropes that Israel or the Jews are controlling the Arab countries, the Arab leaders and other leaders, etc., and that everything is being done by the Jews. I watched this video and I moved to the other one. I immediately found another anti-Semitic content. And I moved to another, it's another anti-Semitic content. It's like constantly showing you anti-Semitic contents because you have chosen to watch that video, which means they are responsible for it. Their algorithms are responsible for it. How can governments regulate algorithms? Is it possible?
I mean, I think it is possible, right? I mean, even, I think some of the platforms that rely on algorithms, whether it's, YouTube or TikTok or whatever. I mean, I think they are making some decisions, right? About what they are going to sort of allow. And by the way, just more broadly, right? These companies are making decisions about what they're going to allow on their platforms all the time, even when it comes to non-sort of anti-Semitism or hate-related issues, right? Like, they can stop, and rightfully so, like, child pornography on these platforms, right? I mean, they have teams to make sure that that type of stuff isn't there, or violent content, right? Or what have you. And the question is, like, for us, it's like, why don't you make the same investment on stopping, anti-Semitism and other forms of hate online? So there's the put the money behind it, hire people to make sure that your platforms don't have that, right? But there's also a technical solution to that. And I am totally convinced that these companies who have created these incredible algorithms and incredible tools can find ways to identify anti-Semitism and other forms of hate and to, make it so that they are not amplifying it. To your point, an algorithm means that you're getting something that you didn't even necessarily ask for. And like, when that is being provided, when hate is being provided when you didn't ask for it, to me, it's almost like people, you'll remember during the, when the cigarette company, the tobacco companies were being sued. And, it's like a cigarette is a nicotine delivery system. That's what they would call, right? So do these platforms, these social media companies, want to be hate delivery systems? Or what will they do to prevent that, right? And so I don't think it's unreasonable for users to think that they should do more. The question is, and honestly, you'll need to have somebody who is steeped much more deeply in this than I, but like, do we need to update Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, right? Which will hold tech platforms accountable for their algorithms and how it impacts hate, harassment, and extremism, right? I mean, that's one way to go at it. You need to talk to somebody, not me, who really can kind of go into the depths of like what 230 means. But also, what we've been asking companies to do is to be more transparent about what their recommendation engines are doing, what their design practices are, right? And Congress should pass federal transparency legislation. Like, people should be able to know. The more that you know, the better you'll understand what's being served up to you. And so that's where I think we have to explore government sort of power to force these companies to do more. It's about transparency, right? It's about the algorithms that you mentioned. But listen, at the end of the day, this is my concern. That will help. What do we do about those platforms that don't exist here, that are somewhere else, that are easily accessible, that don't follow the same rules in the United States, that don't care about that, right? So now do we go to hosting companies? It is a, and some of the hosting companies, they're kind of happy. They don't care that they have, under the guise of free speech, have this stuff. So at the end of the day, I think we need to figure out, how do you make people feel like they need to be accountable and responsible for this? Because this is not about free speech. These are about private companies making money off of hate.
Now, Oren, besides social media, there is a rising product, which is the artificial intelligence. Have you seen in any way the AI contributing to more anti-Semitism? Especially, it has made it easier to create and generate contents.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hilarious to think, hilarious in a very dark way, that there'd be any sort of tools that make anti-Semitism even more common, right? I mean, it's like, you think it's kind of common enough. So listen, I know that we did a study last year, and I know 3/4 of Americans, according to that study, are deeply concerned about the harms of the misuse of generative AI, right? Tools like, whether it's ChatGPT or other stuff, or things that can create video or deep fakes, right? So, I mean, I think in general, we are concerned about misinformation, about fake content, etc. And of course, like, that fake content is going to be used to spread anti-Semitism and hate, because anti-Semitism and hate is often fake content by its nature, right? I mean, no one's, you know what I mean? So I what I'm concerned about, to answer your question, is, will, artificial intelligence make the anti-Semitism more believable for some people, right? Because the images will be powerful, because the stories it'll tell are about winning hearts and minds. Will it identify, the type of video that will seem so real? And so will it be harder for people to tell the difference between what is anti-Semitism and what is not? Yes, I am concerned about that. And frankly, Omar, that to me is my biggest concern about anti-Semitism completely. Anti-Semitism is bad. Not being able to identify anti-Semitism scares me more. And I think the artificial intelligence will make our job, and will make people's resilience to hate and anti-Semitism potentially more difficult. So we need folks to be asking questions now, policymakers, industry professionals, about how to implement safeguards, right, that prevent technology from being weaponized at its early stages.
So, beside the fact that anti-Semitism has been normalized in many places, if I understood you correctly, your concern is that AI will play a greater role in normalizing even more anti-Semitism online. I mean, what should be done about this? I mean, how can you fight this?
Right. I mean, like, what happens if somebody has a question, and, the AI algorithms are based on, data online, right? These massive amounts of data. And some of that includes biased, whether it's anti-Semitism or other forms of hate. These are the big questions that people are struggling with. How do you make sure, if you're taking in tons of data, that the data that it's learning from is not inherently include this hate? And these are the safeguards that need to be implemented, right? To make sure that as these technologies are being developed is that they're not just promoting disinformation, harassment, and extremism. So let me, one way, I don't think this is the only way, but one way, right, is to understand, again, how do you identify anti-Semitism and other forms of hate? Like, what do you need? So, like, for example, ADL has a hate symbols database, right? My team, nobody knows like the language of anti-Semitism, the symbols, the codes, how it's used in the real world and online better than we do. I mean, this is like, we see it every single day. So we have, in some ways, probably the world's most robust data set of anti-Semitism that we can use to teach algorithms how to identify anti-Semitism, right? So in the same way, so the hope, though, is that then that helps people, identify and action that. And so, we work with, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, government entities, non-government, all the time. I mean, part of ADL's job is to educate people about anti-Semitism and to make our insights and analysis available. The question is, how do you do that at scale to potentially be used in a way to help those who are creating these technologies to create an immediate understanding of this anti-Semitism so that it doesn't like overtake what they're trying to build. So, I mean, that's one way, is utilizing the expertise and the examples and the data that organizations like ADL has.
What advice do you have, Oren, to Jewish social media users? How can they safely navigate online space? Because their life has been deeply impacted both offline and online. But as you said, people are online. Their life is becoming online. So what advice do you have based on the experience you have, based on what ADL has been trying to do? If our listeners now are asking you for this advice.
Yeah. So, and I want to note that there are two ways that I think, again, it's not only people in the Jewish community, but others could be impacted by anti-Semitism online. One is the sort of normalization of it because it's part of the content on the platforms that one exists, right? It's kind of the steady stream. But the other is how technology and platforms are weaponized as delivery systems for anti-Semitism. So for what I mean by that is, swatting, right? Where swatting is where people call in a fake bomb threat or, to law enforcement and say somebody's about to blow up this synagogue, let's just say, or somebody's in there and they're going to go kill people. And it's a fake thing. And it's designed to have law enforcement respond with their SWAT team, right? To disrupt services, or, it can be a dangerous situation when people are coming in, right? Guns hot. So swatting is a tactic that has been used by trolls and anti-Semites and others. So for us, finding ways to create more robust, like, laws about swatting, meaning the exploitation of platforms, often because swatting is often used in these, online spaces, not just like a phone call, although that's possible too. That strengthens the protection of the Jewish community and others. Having better laws about how people are exploiting technology is just one way. The other is, I think, again, to your average person who's going online and probably seeing these terrible things, people should feel empowered to report that, report it to the platform itself. If, especially if they have like a trust and safety, group as part of them, they need to hear from those people, report it to ADL. We get tons of reports because then we can sort of elevate it. And part of those discussions that we have with good faith actors is representing the community and being like, this is the type of stuff that they're seeing, right? And try to encourage them to please help by actioning that. So again, no matter who, and by the way, if something's really terrible and a threat, report that to law enforcement, always. But my point is that people should never just kind of see what is happening and just assume somebody else is going to take care of it. It's really important to report, whether that's online in the real world, because data is going to drive policy. Data is going to provide people with the examples that they need to understand what's happening to try to get ahead of it. Beyond that, I'd ask people to think about their own like online hygiene. And this is like just a reality of the world that we live in now. I think, I think we're basically seeing this sort of generation coming up that is used to basically putting everything, their whole lives online. And we got to start thinking about what does that mean? Whether you're Jewish or not Jewish, right? I mean, you really have to be deliberate about what you're putting online, who you're giving access to, because there's always going to be bad actors that are going to try to prey upon you. And so I do think like, again, it's about sort of public education. I'll give an example where this happened. I mean, during the pandemic, which feels like it was 17 years ago, it was not. But, when Zoom bombing became a thing, where people started disrupting the one place that people felt that they could get together when they couldn't actually see each other in person, right? Were these like Zoom meetings. And you had anti-Semites who were coming on, in some cases, intentionally trying to disrupt it because people didn't know how to secure their Zoom calls. So we worked with Zoom, et cetera, and provided some strategies on how to protect your space. So the bottom line is, don't let the world dictate what you do and don't do, but be smart about what you're doing in an online space as well.
Oren, thank you very much for your insights.
All right, Omar, good talking to you.
This was our 36 minutes on anti-Semitism.